Hey, Merry Christmas in July, everybody. My name is Brenda KB Anderson, and I'm a crochet instructor and designer. And today I'm going to be sharing with you guys how to make the Christmas elf hat. There is a free download, the link's in the description, so you can go ahead and download that and follow along if you like. Otherwise it'll be available for download later if you just want to watch this for now. But this project is so fun because you can get really creative with the colors and just the whole idea. When I was thinking of something to design for a Christmas project, I thought I really want to design something that could be like a photo prop, or it could just be a useful thing, both. Like I don't want it to just sit unused for, the whole rest of the year, right? So you can actually wear this to keep your head warm, and it's pretty silly and whimsical, but so fun. And just imagine how fun it would be to have like a whole family or group of friends or whatever wearing these silly hats together in a picture. So yeah, one of the things that I came across when I was working up this hat and I was starting my research was that I really didn't like how the stripes were leaving kind of a jog as I switched colors all the way up the hat. So I thought, oh, well, maybe this can be a project where I use like a helix style of color changing. So if you've never heard about that, this is probably a little bit more well-known technique in the knitting world, but you can use it pretty much. It's the same principle in crochet, but you're basically making a spiral of one color and then you're starting the next color and working that around and then picking up the first color, and you're never actually joining at the end of the round because there is no end of the round. They spiral around each other all the way up the hat, which makes it really nice because you don't have a join. There's absolutely no join anywhere in here, and and because of that, the join that happens when you create stripes, you would probably carry your yarn all the way up the hat, and then it restricts the stretch just a little bit, and it kind of makes it, I don't know, it just was bugging me how it looked before. So now I am very happy with how this hat works and how it looks. All the stripes, they look very, very, very nice, and you don't have to deal with that kind of funny jog. Anyway, so this tutorial is, I'll be walking you through the whole process of making these hats. But it's also, interesting, hopefully it will be interesting to those of you who are just curious about how the helix crochet process works, to learn how to stripe something that you're working in the round and not have any joins. All right. Well, I'm glad that you guys are here. Of course, this is a live event. If you guys have any questions, if you have any comments, advice to newer crocheters, if you have suggestions on things you'd like to see in the future, either techniques or certain kinds of projects and that type of thing, I would love to hear it. So put that in the chat, and I'll try and answer any questions you might have during this live event. All right, so let's start out by just taking we'll be talking about our materials first. So obviously you're going to need the pattern download so that you can follow along with all the stitch counts and everything. There are 5 different sizes in this project. It goes from baby all the way up through a large adult or adult large size. So you can make one for everyone if you want. But because of that, you're going to need the pattern to be able to make the size that you want to make. I'm just going to be working on the smallest sizes for the most part in this tutorial, just for time's sake. But just know that there are sizes all the way from baby all the way up to adult large. Oh, and hi to Dawn. I'm glad you're here. I recognize you. Oh, and okay, so Patty is wondering if you can see the inside. Yeah, great question. So here is the inside of the hat. This is what it looks like. It looks almost identical on the inside to the, here, let me pull this in here. So here's the outside, here's the inside. And there's no joins. Oh, but you can see, here we go. This is where the spiral starts. So there is a little bit of a jog right here, a little bit of a, you can see where the colors both start from. But because I designed this with this fold-up brim, you're meant to fold it up just a little bit over that. Here it is right here, that little anomaly right there where we start out so that you don't see that. Okay, so in that way, yeah. Okay, I got confused for a second there and I thought maybe this was the outside, but this is the inside. You can see there's no joins anywhere in the hat. So All right, let's see. Oh, Sandy says these are super duper adorable. Aw, greetings from Australia. Hello. Oh, and you've heard about this helix technique. Awesome, but in knitting, yeah. That's where I first found out about it too. I knit and I crochet, which is a really nice thing to be able to do both, because sometimes there's a technique in one that you've already used or come across, and then you can kind of apply that to the other, which is, yeah, what we're doing here. So, all right, and hi to Donna from Arizona, and aw, Sarah's giving me a sweet compliment. Oh my gosh, you know how to crochet because of me. Ah, that's like the biggest compliment ever. Thank you so much for writing that in there. I really appreciate that. You guys are all so sweet. Okay, oh, and Patty's wondering, how does it jump up to the next color? Okay, I will get to that once we start working through, but just general overview, I can show you as you start working around. So this hat is made actually back and forth and turn rows for the ribbing. You make a long strip and then you join it together, and then we do one round in the main color, which is the red. Then we started working here in the white, and we're starting with shorter stitches and getting slowly taller here at this point, just to start out with. Then we work all the way around in that white and we stop, then we pick up the red again. Okay, and work the red all the way around and stop when we get to the top of the white. It's really hard to visualize when I'm showing you this, but once we get to the actual sample, it'll make a lot more sense when I can actually show you the hat in progress. Okay. Okay, and we have a hello from Argentina. Hi. Okay. Oh, okay. Somebody saw some coasters using the helix technique in crochet. Yeah, like those spirally ones. This is a very similar thing. It's slightly different because we're not starting at the center of a circle and working our way out, but it's pretty much the same thing where you work a little on it, then you can put a stitch marker in it, and then you work the next little section, then you work the next little section. You kind of have all these working loops going on at the same time in those coasters, if I'm thinking of the same thing you're thinking of, just depending on how many colors you have. We only are working with 2 colors in this hat, so you're gonna have like 2 working loops. And if that sounds confusing, don't worry, it's not confusing. Once we get to that part, you'll just be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And it's a lot easier than what you would think. Okay, so let's get started working up our hat. So like I said before, we're going to start with that ribbing, the ribbed band, and we're going to work that back and forth in turned rows, and we're going to work that in a half double crochet ribbed pattern. So we're going to start out, we're making the smallest size, so I'm going to start out with a chain of 15. So you'll have a different number for some of the larger sizes. Oh, and I should mention, I got a little off track already here. I'm using a worsted weight yarn. So I designed this with worsted weight in mind because I know a lot of you guys have extra worsted weight. And this is a great project for using up those not quite complete skeins. Like for most of the sizes, you don't need a full skein of each color. But you can look at the pattern download. That gives you all the information, what yarns I used in these samples. I also tell you in there exactly how much, like yardage-wise, you'll actually need, and the brands of the yarns that I'm using, and all that information is in your pattern download. But right now I'm using an acrylic worsted weight yarn. I would recommend either using acrylic or wool just for its kind of loftiness and warmth and squishiness for this project, or is there some sort of blend, or alpaca thrown in there is fine too. Any kind of blend of any of those yarns would work very well. And I am using an F hook, which is a 3.75 millimeter hook. And this is a smaller hook than I normally use for worsted weight yarn. And I'm doing that on purpose for 2 reasons. First of all, I want the ribbing to be very substantial. It'll be pretty, it might even feel a little bit stiff when you work it up, but once you steam block this, if you're using acrylic, you should steam block it at the end. We'll talk a little more about that later. It'll soften up a lot, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't get all stretched out. And because the hat is a little bit longer, I thought, and has a pom-pom on it, has a little bit of extra weight. It doesn't feel heavy on your head, but it's not just like a normal skull cap. So I wanted to make sure the ribbing was nice and substantial so that it would kind of, fit snug around your head and stay in place and not be sliding all over while you're caroling or sledding or whatever you're doing in this hat. So this hook is a little smaller on purpose because of that. And then later on in the project, we're going to be working in double crochet, and the double crochet stitches, there tends to be a little bit of, air between each stitch, a little more so than a single crochet, which would be more dense. I wanted to use the double crochet because I liked how it looked, but I also did not want to let all that windy air come through because I live in Minnesota and I wanted to make a practical and warm hat. So again, that's another reason that the hook is a little smaller than normal. So you'll use whatever hook you need to in order to get the gauge I have listed in the pattern, and we can check the gauge as we go, as we start, as we start working up this ribbing. So I'm going to chain 15 here to get started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Okay, and now we're going to work into the bottom of our chain. So if you look at our chain here, we have all these little V's and they're all stacked up. And if you roll that over so the V's are touching the table, you'll see all those little horizontal dashes on the back, and we're going to work underneath those dashes. So we're going to start out doing a half double crochet. We're going to skip that very first chain. So we'll yarn over, insert into that second chain, yarn over and pull up a loop, and now there's 3 loops on our hook. We'll yarn over and pull through all 3. That's our very first half double crochet. And we're going to make half double crochets all the way across. So this first row can be a little bit tricky because, you know, if you make your chain a little bit tight, it can be, especially when you're working with these little, a slightly smaller hook at a slightly more, a more dense gauge than normal. So when you do that original foundation chain, think about that and making it just a little bit looser. Some people like to go up 1 hook size for that if they're having trouble making their chains just a little bit too tight. All right, I have just a couple more stitches here. So whatever color is what you want on the brim of this hat or the ribbed section here, that's what I call the main color in the pattern. Okay, so we got to the end and we're going to chain 2, 1 and 2, and I like to chain those fairly tightly. We're never going to work into those. Those are just a turning chain, and usually when I do a half double crochet ribbing, I don't work into my turning chains. I just make them and then I turn my work like you're turning a page in a book, and then I'm going to start with that very first stitch down here. So we're going to do a half double crochet, and this time we're going to work it underneath the back loop only. So that's back here. Normally we would work under both of these loops here in this first stitch, but we're just working under the back right there because that's going to leave the front loop free. It allows our fabric to be a little bit more stretchy, and also it'll give us that sort of ribbed, you know, corrugated looking fabric, you know, that sort of, those sort of ridges that we get. So we're just going to work those half double crochets all the way across. Looks like we have some more hellos. Belle says good morning from Massachusetts. Oh, I'm glad you're here, Belle. Okay, and Sarah's saying, which crochet hook in centimeters do I need for this project in centimeters? Okay, so I don't know the centimeter equivalent. Well, let's see. This is 3.75 millimeters. That's usually how hooks are sized with the metric system. I think that's what you're asking. And then for this project in centimeters, let me know if that didn't answer your question. Oh, just saying they thought the same, that was the same technique. I think we're talking about the coasters maybe again. But yes, those ones are made with different colors. Yes, I mean, it is almost exactly the same technique, and you'll see it just looks slightly different because we're working around in like an open circle, like a tube shape, as opposed to the coasters where you start at the center of a flat circle, if that makes sense. That's really the only, but it's basically using the exact same technique, yeah. So, I mean, you were right about that. Okay. Oh, and Christina's watching from Idaho. Welcome, Christina. Oh, yeah, and Sarah meant millimeters. Okay, yes, 3.75 millimeters. But, you know, you may be using a slightly different hook size than I do, you know, because we all crochet differently, so it's important to be able to check your gauge. So in order to check your gauge, Here, let me just get to the end of my row here. I did that turning chain again, turned my work, and I worked another row in half double crochet through the back loop only, kind of while we were talking here. So you can start to see that ribbing fabric taking shape. You can see that ridge there that was left open by working that back loop. So as you are working up your hat, you can start with whatever hook size you would need for a dense gauge in a worsted weight yarn. If you'd like, you can just start with the 3.75 millimeter hook like I'm recommending. But if you know yourself and you're like, oh, I'm a loose crocheter and I really need to go down more, a couple more sizes, or I'm a tight crocheter, I probably don't need to use an F. I could probably use a G or an H. Start with whatever you think is best. And after you work back and forth for, let me check the gauge here. For 13 rows, then you can measure your piece. So after you've worked 13 rows back and forth, you'll measure your piece in this direction, and if that's 4 inches, then you're spot on with your hook size. If it's bigger than 4 inches, then you should try it again with a smaller hook size, and if it's smaller than 4 inches, then go up a hook size and start over, okay? So this is what's gonna help you figure out what hook size you need in order to get the same gauge, same feel of fabric that I'm getting, so that your hat's gonna turn out the size that you want it to, and that the pattern says it will, right? Because if you don't check your gauge, it may not turn out the same size, and you might end up with a hat that's too big or too small, and that's very frustrating. So it's better to check it now. And really, for those of you who have watched me before, you know that I'm always trying to wiggle my way out of doing gauge swatches, because I have a hard time making myself do them myself, so I feel for you guys who who always want to skip the gauge swatch. I understand that. So for a lot of my projects, I figure out a way that we can check the gauge as we're working on the project, and that way, if you happen to, just get the gauge right on, then you can just keep going and no time lost. Okay. All right, so you're going to continue working on your ribbing. You're going to make a long strip, depending on the size you're making. There's different amounts of rows that you're going to be creating there. Let me get to that section in the pattern. Okay, so you're either going to be working 43, 49, 55, 61, or 67 rows, depending on what size you're making, okay? And then we are going to seam the ribbing with crochet. So here is my ribbing. I secretly changed colors on you guys, not to trick you. Okay, so here we go. So here's the smallest size. This was, I believe I said 43. Yeah, 43 rows. So then we're going to chain one, just like we're going to turn and work another row. Okay, so we're going to turn our work. Here's our beginning chain. Then we're going to bring the foundation edge, which is right here, and we're going to lay it right on top of that last row we worked. Okay, so we have them kind of held together like this. Then we're going to slip stitch them together, and let me just double check this and make sure. Yep, through the back loop of the row in front and the front loop of the row behind. So what we're doing is, we're not going to work into that chain that we made, that was just our turning chain, but we're going to work underneath the back loop of the row or the edge that we're holding in front, and then directly behind that we're going to go through the front loop of the edge that's held behind. So what I mean by that is that we're going through just one loop of each surface here, and they're the loops that are touching each other, the loops that are held together, okay? So, and then we're just gonna grab that yarn, pull through both stitches, and pull through the loop on our hook. And we're gonna do that all the way across. So going under the back loop, then going under the front loop, grab that yarn, pull through both stitches, and through the loop on our hook. Okay, so we're just gonna do this all the way across. This is going to seam our piece into that tube. And just try not to make this seam too tight. People tend to make tight slip stitches. It's just part of the anatomy of the stitches that we're making. So if you're having trouble with that, if you feel like it's tightening that or not allowing this to be its full width here because you're making those slip stitches, then just go up for a larger hook just for this little seaming section here. All right, and whenever I have like a few stitches left, I just count up how many I have left on each edge. I have 3 here and 3 there. But if they were off by 1, you can fix that at this point before you get all the way to the end. You can either rip back, or usually what I'll do is I'll just go through one of the edges twice until it evens out. And that should be just fine. You just want to make sure that, oh, I think I went through the back loop there. You just want to make sure that you do that little fix before you get to the end, because otherwise it's going to look kind of jagged where the two ends come together, or where the edge of your ribbing is. Okay. All right, so now we're just going to rotate our work so that we can work right around the top edge. That slip stitch seam, this is what it looks like. It's a little bit of a ridge here. And then on the back side, you can't even really tell where that seam is. It's very, it just blends right in really, really well. So the reason we're leaving the slip stitch seam on the outside is because when we make this hat, we're going to fold the brim up, and we want the slip stitch seam to be hidden. So we're just going to leave this on the outside for now. Okay? And now we're going to start working around the top edge of our hat. And let's see, I give you 2 different ways of doing it. One way would be to divide your piece into 4 sections. So here's our working loop right there. We can place a stitch marker here. Then we can match those 2 up with each other right in the middle. And then we can place a stitch marker on each folded edge here. And that's going to give us 4 equal sections right there. And I do give you stitch counts on how many stitches to place within each of those sections, because we're just going to be working into these row ends. So that way you can kind of evenly space your stitches all the way around. So you'll know, like if you're working the smallest size, you would do 14 stitches between here and here, okay, into the first and the third sections, and then 15 single crochets into the second and fourth. So you do 14, 15, 14, 15 if you were making the smallest size. The other way that you can do this, if you don't really feel like, you know, spacing your stitches like that, if you are able to distinguish, if you've been crocheting a little while and you can recognize that there is like a ridge here and then a valley here and a ridge here and a valley here, then you can place your stitches accordingly to those ridges and valleys. So what you do is you'll place a single crochet into each of the next 2 row ends. So this would be a row end. Here's a valley, and then this is a ridge. Okay, so you put 1 single crochet here, 1 single crochet here, so that's in the next 2 row ends. And then the following row end, which would be this valley here, you'd place 2 single crochets right there. And then you repeat that all the way around your hat. So that way you don't have to actually mark out all these quadrants, and you don't have to count all your stitches. You just need to pay attention to how many stitches you're putting per ridge or valley, if that makes sense. So here, right here is an indentation, so that is a valley. So we're going to put a single crochet into the end here. So we just insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. And that is our first single crochet, and I'm going to mark that so we don't get confused when we come around. Here is a ridge right here. It's kind of sticking out. So we're going to place a single crochet right in the top of that ridge. Okay, so we've done 1 single crochet in the valley, 1 single crochet in the ridge. Now we're going to do 2 single crochets in the valley here. So 1 and 2, and then we're going to repeat that. So we've got 1 here, 1 in this row end, 1 in this row end, and 2 in the next row end, which is right here. 1 and 2. 1, 1, and 2. 1, whoops, 1, 1 in the valley, and 2. 1 in the next row end, 1 in the next row end, and 2 in the next row end. 1 and 2. 1 in the next row end, 1 in the next row end, and 2 in the next row end. 1 and 2. All right, so we just keep repeating this all the way around our hat. 1, 1, and 2. 1, 1, and 2. All right, we just have one more quadrant left here. 1, 1, and 2. 1, 1, and 2. 1, 1. Oh, yeah. So 1. Oh, yeah, we still have one more section. Sorry, I thought that was the end. I was confused by my stitch markers. Okay, and here's 2. All right, so we have one more quadrant left now. Last time we were only halfway around. Okay, so 1, 1, and 2. Usually I use a red stitch marker for the beginnings of my rounds. That's just like a thing that I personally do because it helps me. So that's why I was confused by that. I don't normally throw a red stitch marker in a random place like I just did. Okay, 1, 1, and 2. All right, and then you'll find that when you get all the way around your hat, you will have, let's see if this is true of every size. Yep, it is. For every size, you'll get all the way around, and then when you do your last repeat of that, you only have one row left, and then you just do 2 single crochets into that row end. Okay? And when you're placing those single crochets, you don't need to place it in exactly some specific perfect part of the stitch. You're just looking for a place to put it where it looks nice. That's just, I mean, it's just as simple as that. If it doesn't look good as creating a hole, pull that stitch out and put it in a different spot. Okay. Let's see. It looks like we've got a couple of questions here. Let's see. I got to get caught up. Okay, Gloria's wondering if this would be difficult for a beginner. Actually, if you've done like a couple washcloths or something like that, you know, if you're not like brand new, this is your very first project, I think it's perfectly fine for a beginner to do this project. I really do, because we're only using a couple different stitches, really, the basic stitches. There's nothing, you know, it's not complicated. And once you see how the helix part works, you'll just realize, oh, it's not that hard. You'll see. Let's see, good morning to Renee. Okay. Missy Doll is wondering if I was going in every stitch, and I'm wondering if you were wondering about when I'm working this round here. I'm going into every row end, but some of the row ends I'm working in twice. If that doesn't answer your question, then pop back in here and let me know, okay? Okay, Brenda, can you show the first stitch when you go up a row after you did the 2 chains? Okay, so I'm guessing you're talking about when I was working on this. So after we worked our half double crochets all the way across, we did the 2 chains that are turning for a turning chain. We turn our work and see, you never count the chain on your hook. That doesn't ever count as a chain, it's just there. Then you've got a chain here and a chain there, those 2 chains. Those are the ones you made as your turning chains. They just get ignored. They're just like, think of them as a little ladder to get up to the next level. And then here is the very first stitch after that. And because we're working in the ribbing, we're gonna be going underneath that back loop. So we go in underneath here, like that. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know. Okay. Yeah, Chatman wants to get a shout out. Hi. Hi, yeah, Chatman. Thanks for saying hello. I'm glad you're here. Oh, Patty likes my top. Thank you. And we have a hello from Brazil. Awesome. I'm so glad you guys are here. You guys are a friendly bunch. Okay, so we've made it all the way around. Our very first round, and that is probably the trickiest thing of this whole hat, is just making sure you're, you know, getting enough stitches around and distributing them in the right places. And you can go ahead and just count those up and make sure, you know, that you have the right amount of stitches. If you're off by 1, you could just pull it back and then adjust and, you know, pull back a few stitches, add another one in there, or have one less in there, whatever. It doesn't need to be specifically in those spaces that I was telling you to put them in. That's just a way to help you distribute them all the way around. Okay, so now we're working on round number 2. So we're going to, let's see, but before we move on, we're just going to put a stitch marker in that loop. So that's the loop where we finished working with that main color there. We just finished round number 1. So we just take our hook out, put a loop or put a stitch marker in the working loop. Now here's the very first stitch of the round. We had marked that earlier, and we're going to go ahead and join a new color. So I'm just grabbing this off-white color. So we're going to pull up a loop in this very first stitch, in that marked stitch. So we just insert and then just grab that yarn and pull it up, okay? And just let this kind of hang out in the inside of your work. Then we're going to chain one, so we just yarn over and bring that through. That's not going to count as anything. We're not going to work into that chain. It's just kind of to secure our work in place and to get us ready to start. So then we're going to do a number of single crochet stitches, and this will depend on the size you're working. So you'll have to look at round 2 of your pattern. So here's round 2. For me, I'm doing the smallest size, so I'm going to do 14 single crochets, okay? So this is 1 stitch into each stitch around, and we're going to start with the same very first stitch that we pulled up that loop in. So we're going to go back into that same stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, then we're going to yarn over and pull through 2. So that's the first single crochet. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So single crochets are pretty short. Basically, we're making a very long ramp to get us up to the height of a double crochet. That's what we're actually doing here. So we worked 14 single crochets. Then we're going to work in half double crochets, and I'm going to do 14 of those too. This will be different depending on the size you're working on though. So here's a half double crochet, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 3. That's the same stitch that we were doing on the ribbing, except now we're working under both loops. So we're going to count 14 of those. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So those stitches are just a little bit taller than those single crochet stitches we started out with. And now we're going to move up to the next height, which was double crochet. So we're going to yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay? And we're going to continue that in each stitch around. All the way to the end, actually. So regardless of what size you're making, you'll do a certain amount of single crochets, you'll do a certain amount of half double crochets, and then you're just going to fill in each stitch for the rest of the round with a double crochet. All right, so now we're up to the height of the stripes that we're going to be making throughout the rest of the hat. So from here on out, we're just going to be using double crochet stitches. All right, I've got a few more to do till we get to the end of the round here. All right, you can see we're coming up on that last stitch of the round where we had marked it, okay? So we've got one more to do here, and now there's only 1 stitch left. My yarn's a little splitty here. There we go. Okay, so here's the very last stitch we had marked, and you can kind of tighten that up if that helps. I like to hang on to the top of this stitch. Like I'll pull a stitch marker over with my finger and I'll pinch that to work into the stitch. Otherwise, sometimes it can, I don't know, that stitch marker gets in the way. It can definitely, if you don't have a stitch marker in there, then the loop will undo and it'll start to, you know, frog your piece accidentally. So you want to make sure you have a stitch marker in there. As you get more used to switching back and forth between colors, you may find it just as easy to just pull your loop a little longer and hang on to your loop and not bother with the stitch markers. But that really just depends on the way that you crochet, how careful you are about things like that. So I would recommend, at least for a while until you feel very confident, just always putting that stitch marker in when you drop a color. Always put a stitch marker in so that it's not going to unravel on you accidentally. Okay, so here's the very last stitch of this new color. So we're still doing a double crochet and we're just working it into the top of that last stitch, just like normal. But see, I'm kind of just holding that loop over to the side. It doesn't need to be that long. You can also just hold the stitch marker in place like that and make your stitch. Okay, so that we just finished our round, and now we're just going to pull our hook out of that loop, and then we're going to elongate this loop so that it doesn't fall back in when we take the stitch marker out. And we're going to place the old stitch marker into that new loop like that. And now we're going to put this old loop back on our hook. And you can see we're just ready to go around and work into these white stitches. So on round number 3, we're just doing, let's see, a double crochet into each stitch all the way around, okay? So we're gonna start with that very first single crochet. Remember we did that chain 1 at the beginning. We're ignoring that chain 1. We're going straight into that single crochet, which is right there between my thumbs. So we're gonna work right into that stitch and create a double crochet. And there will be like a little bit of a tiny hole right here, but to me, that's just not a very big hole, and you can also stitch it up a little bit with this yarn tail here later if it bothers you. But that's really the only, I haven't stitched it up in any of my samples. I don't even notice it anymore. It really doesn't bother me. But for those of you who are, you know, kind of a perfectionist about your crochet, I understand. You could kind of stitch between these 2 white stitches to kind of bring that together if you're worried about that. Okay, and now we're just going to continue making those double crochets into each stitch around. So it doesn't matter whether you're working into a single crochet or whether you're working into the half double crochets, you're still just making one double crochet into each stitch around. And I'll show you what happens at the end of the round. And then you'll be like, oh, I see. This really isn't that tricky at all. You just kind of, you're only going to be working with 1 loop at a time. You know, there will be 2 loops for the rest of this hat. There will be 2 open loops. One of the loops you're working with currently, and the other one has a stitch marker in it. And you just trade off which color you're working with. Every time you get around, to the end, you just switch loops. So we're working through those half double crochets here. And we are almost to the double crochet section. Here we go. I'm just going to check in here and see if I have any more questions. Oh, we've got lots more hellos from you guys. Oh, maybe just a couple more. Okay. Ones that I didn't see before. Okay. Okay. All right, I'm all caught up. Sorry about that, you guys. All right, so we have just a little more to go and we'll get to the end of this round. This is round number 3. So round number 3 is the first round where we're working all double crochets, okay? The very first round we did, that was just that initial round of single crochets all the way around to kind of get things ready. And then the first contrast color round, that's the white in my sample here, that round had, we started out with shorter stitches and eventually we went through single crochets and then half double crochets and eventually we got to the double crochets. And so now that we're at double crochet level, we're going to stay there for the rest of the hat. And here we are coming up on the end of our round here. You can see that that was the very last, this is the very last stitch of the previous round here. So I've got one more to do before I get to that last stitch. And here's the very last stitch, just making a double crochet into the top Just like that. I'm gonna pull up on my loop a little bit, pull up on this loop a little bit. I'm just pulling up on the loop so nothing undoes, nothing can fall apart as I'm switching the stitch marker around, okay? And now we're gonna put our hook back in the old color here, or well, the contrast color, I should say. And we are ready to keep working. So we're just gonna make double crochet stitches all the way around. So you can see what's happening here is we started that spiral and now we're just gonna continue switching off. We're kind of like paving the way with one color for the following color to work into, if that makes sense. And for something like this, I would recommend, you know, as you're working on it, try, if you have to set it down and go do something else, then make sure you know the difference between, I guess you can find the beginning of your round because you can look at where this started. You will always be able to see that, and then you can follow it up and know that that's the beginning of your round. But it's very easy to lose track of where the actual beginning of your round is in this hat if you don't look at where this started and look at a stitch marker that's right along that, following that line all the way up. But the good thing is with this hat, you know, it doesn't matter too much, especially later on when we get into the repetitive. We're going to start doing some decreases and then it'll be the same every single round for a long time. Then it doesn't really even matter. You can go ahead and lose track if you want. All right, so I'll get to the end of this round and then we're going to jump ahead a little bit and I'll start showing you how to do decreases, how to shape the top of the hat. But you can see this is really not that tricky. Once you just understand what's actually happening here and like just knowing, you just crochet all the way around. And then when you get to that last stitch that has the marker in it, you'll notice it because you'll be like, this is weird. This doesn't normally happen when I crochet. Then you'll notice it and you can switch which loop you're working with and continue with that, you know, the color that is coming from below basically. All right, we are coming up on that stitch marker again. So we're going to be switching which color we're working with. You just have a few more stitches left. There we are. Here is the very last double crochet. Okay, that's a very last stitch. We're going to work into that stitch and we'll just pull up our loop, pull on that loop a little bit, switch our marker to the other loop and replace the old loop on our hook and we're ready to go around with this one. Okay, so we just switch and keep going. So this is just going to happen for a number of rounds. For the size that I'm making, let's see. I only need to work up through round 6 like this. So that would be, the red round, which you can barely see here because it's blending into the ribbing. So that would be round 1. The contrast color is round 2, round 3, round 4. And then here's round 5 that I'm working up. I would do one more round and then I would move on to, oh wait, no, that's not true. Okay, sorry. I'm only doing round 4 for my size without doing any decreases. So by now I would have already switched. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so on this round that I just barely started here, this would be round number 5 on my hat. So I hope that makes sense. If you're losing track of how many rounds you've worked, just make sure you're counting that first round, which is going to be matching the ribbing. So that was our round of single crochet in the color that matches the ribbing. So that would be 1. 2 is the first contrast color. 3 is the main color, 4 is the next contrast color, and it should be obvious like the next rows after that for counting up your rows. But for my size, because I'm making the smallest size, I only work up through round number 4 where I am working even, meaning I am not increasing, I am not decreasing, I'm just placing 1 stitch in each stitch around. Okay, so I've already done that, and I've actually already started on round number 5. So round number 5, we're going to be placing, let's see, we're going to be making 2 decreases for this round, okay? So a decrease means you're taking, where there were 2 stitches before, you're turning them into 1 stitch, and I'll show you how to do that. You can place your decreases anywhere in the round. You don't have to place them in a specific spot, but it is helpful if you try to place them, because you're going to be doing this for a couple of rows. For my size, I'm only doing this for 2 rows in a row, and then we're going to switch to another decrease pattern. But you'll do this for a number of rows, and so on the first row, just kind of think to yourself, okay, maybe for my 2 decreases, I'll put 1 here, and then I'll put 1 kind of across it over here. Okay, so 1 here and 1 there. And then on the following row, I could put 1 over here and 1 over there. And if it's something that you feel like I'm not going to remember to do that, you can go ahead and just use contrasting markers and place them in here. Just look at your piece and be like, okay, I'll do a decrease here and I'll decrease there. And then you can put those 2 markers in to prompt you to do your decreases there. And then after you work those, you'll know where you just made your decreases. If you put your stitch markers back in, then you can move them to a different location. Because what you want to do is you want to not place a decrease directly above or right next to another decrease. You want to just try to keep them spread out as you're working on this hat. I decided when I wrote up this pattern, I didn't want to specifically tell you where to put each decrease because there's so many rounds, and it just seems like it would make the pattern really long, and it is not necessary to have them in specific spots, really. You just kind of want to balance it out a little bit. So for this round, this is my first round of decreases. I'm going to do one right here, and then I'm going to do one about halfway around, okay? So to do a decrease, we're going to yarn over, insert into the next stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. This is just like the beginning of a double crochet. And now we're going to do we're going to repeat that in the next stitch. Okay, so we still have those 2 loops on our hook, and we're going to leave them there. So we're going to yarn over, insert into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. And now we have 3 loops on our hook, and we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3. So that just gathered those 2 stitches and turned them into 1. So there is our first decrease of the round. I'm going to mark my decreases in yellow here. And then I'll do the next one somewhere over here on the opposite side. So I'm going to work my way around, just making a double crochet into each stitch until I get to about halfway across the hat from the decrease that I made. So the reason we don't want to put our decreases right on top of each other is because when you do that, it starts, especially in a striping pattern, your eye is going to start going right to where those decreases are. It's going to create a line that you'll be able to see, which I find kind of distracting. So that's why we just like to put them in different places on each round. We like to mix it up a little bit each round, so that way your eye is not led to follow those decreases. And sometimes we use those lines as like style lines, and we do that on purpose, but for this hat, especially because it's striped, it was just distracting. So I wanted to make sure that you guys knew how to just kind of move those decreases around each time. All right, so we're about halfway across. Maybe I'll do just a couple more stitches here. We're about halfway across from where I did my first decrease. And I'm going to do another decrease here. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 and stop. I'm going to do that again into the next stitch. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2 and stop. And now we've got 3 loops on our hook. We'll yarn over and pull through all 3. And that's our next decrease. Okay, so we've got 2 decreases. This is round number 5 of the smallest size, but just depending on what size you're working, might be a later round. And we're just going to continue making those double crochets all the way around to the very last stitch, and then we'll switch colors just like usual. So the whole rest of the hat is just basically this. We're just crocheting around. We're switching back and forth between the two colors. Every time we get, to that marked stitch, we switch colors. And then we're going to be doing decreases. And so in order to shape the hat for a certain section, the section we're working now, we're doing 2 decreases per round, which is a fairly gradual decrease. And then after a number of rounds, for my hat, it's only 2 rounds, but for other sizes, there would be more of just doing 2 decreases per round. Then we are going to switch to a more aggressive decreasing, where we just place more decreases in each round. All right, so we're switching here. And then for my size, I can see, oh, that's where I made my decreases. I'm gonna move those. So maybe I'll do my decreases over here and opposite that this time. So I'll just kind of move my decreases over here and over here. Okay, so I'm just gonna crochet around until I get to those stitch markers, and then I'll do my decreases in those locations. All right, so after, I think you guys can imagine how that would be, right? If I come across here, do a decrease here, double crochet all the way over here, do a decrease here, and reach the end of the row, then I would switch colors again. And on my following row, you can see, if you look at the pattern, here we are, rounds 7 through 9 for the smallest size. Larger sizes would have different numbers that you would be working this. But in this section here, we're going to be doing 4 decreases per round. Okay, so it's twice as many as we've been doing. So what that means is, instead of placing just 2 stitch markers or decreasing twice in your round, you're going to be placing 4. And so you might think, okay, well, I'll put one here, I'll put one here, here, and here. Okay, so you just kind of disperse them fairly evenly. You can do, you definitely do not need to count. It doesn't need to be that specific. You can just sort of eyeball it. And I wish I had 4 of the same color here, because that would be helpful. But just know, like for me, I'm gonna always keep this red one for my beginning of round marker, and it's in just one loop, so that'll help me keep that straight. But the rest of the markers are telling me that's where I need to do my decreases. So every time you get to a stitch marker, you do a decrease. So the decrease is exactly the same thing as a double crochet 2 together. You'll see that in stitch patterns. I often use that as well. I usually just use the term decrease when I'm telling you to do it in this method, where you just mark the locations where you're going to be doing those decreases or those double crochet 2 together stitches. So we would work those decreases at those stitch markers, then and replace them as you go. Then you can see where you made your decreases. Then on the next round, you can place those stitch markers in a different location. Now, you may be thinking, ugh, I don't really want to be pulling all these stitch markers in and out of my hat all the time. That's really annoying. So if you are a person who can just sort of visualize in your mind, like, oh, okay, like maybe it's to me, I always think about this as like the face of a clock, and I think about if I do my decreases at like 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 9 o'clock, then the next time, I'll pick, 1:30 and whatever else is the other quadrants of the clock. I could picture where they would go, but I don't know. Anyway, if that makes sense, like just to think about moving them and having that in your head, if you're able to do that, then you don't need to use these stitch markers. They don't need to be in a super specific spot. And really, it's okay if you do a decrease here and then in the next row, you do one just a couple stitches away. That's fine. They don't have to be like, it doesn't need to be super specific is what I'm trying to say. So this is just to kind of help you disperse them on each round so that you don't start getting those focal points where all the decreases all stack up. Now, as you're working through your hat, you're gonna decrease 4 times each round for a number of rounds. And then, let me just show you what this looks like here. I'll show you on this little bitty hat. Okay, so at the beginning, we worked even. Then we did 2 decreases per round. Then we came in a little bit quicker here and we're doing 4 decreases per round for a little section. So this kind of like fits on your head, right? It kind of comes in this little bubble. And then after you do the 4 decreases per round, you go back to 2 decreases per round. So then you just only use 2 stitch markers to keep track of your decreases if that's the way you want to do it. And then you're going to just continue all the way up the hat. And there's a certain number of rounds that you need to work, but if you don't really want to count your rounds and you don't want to keep track of that, you're just going to keep doing that until you have 6 stitches left in your hat. Okay, so just keep checking when you get towards the end, after you do your round, after you do your decreases, if you have 6 stitches left, then you will move on to the next section, which would be round 28, 32, 35, 40, or 44, just depending on the size you're working on. And so for me, this is the second to largest size here. Let me just check and make sure I've got all my decreases. And I have 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so I stopped a little early so I could show you that very last round here where I decreased to 6. And don't worry, once you start getting to the tip of the hat, don't worry about stacking your decreases at this point because it's, you probably have to put them very close to, if not on top of or sharing your other decreases. So don't worry about it when you get here. You can see I have a decrease right there. It's like, sort of like an upside down V of a stitch. So I'm going to avoid putting a decrease right there. But I'm going to put one in the next spot here. So here's another decrease. Here's my first decrease of this round. And I'll just place the second decrease right here. Just like that. And then there's 2 more stitches left. So 1 and then 2. Okay, so here we are. We have just arrived at round number 20. We're about to do round number 28. So here we are kind of creating, we're going to switch to the next color because we've completed our round. And now we're going to kind of make a reverse ramp or a ramp going down. We're trying to even this out because right now we have this kind of crazy spiral. It's much shorter here than it is here. So that's what we're attempting to do here with some stitches. We're going to do a half double crochet into each of the next 3 and single crochet into the next 3. Okay, so we've been doing double crochets practically this whole time since the very beginning of making this hat. And now we're going to go back to doing 3 half double crochets. So 1, 2, 3, and 3 single crochets. 1, 2, and 3. And we can just fasten off here. So we're just going to cut, leaving a little bit of a tail so we can weave that in later. And we'll just pull that through. So that's fastened off. And then we can place the live loop back on our hook, and we're going to do exactly the same thing where we half double crochet into the next 3 and single crochet into the following 3. So half double. And it is a little awkward because it's pretty small here. Half double, and 1, 2, and 3. And there's our very last stitch, and we can go ahead and fasten that off. Pull that right through. And then we can weave this in. So usually what I do is I will just get rid of the color that was the second to the last color. Okay, so not the very last round, the previous round. Let's weave that in. So it's kind of awkward to do this. You can turn it inside out if you like, but I'm just going to kind of weave this through following that spiral of the white stitches here. Let me pull this out of the way so you can see a little better. we're just kind of getting rid of this color here. And I'm going to weave it back and forth in a couple of directions just to make it less likely it's going to pop out. There we go. All right, so we got rid of that one, and now we just have that very last, the color that was the last round we worked, okay? And we can go ahead and just weave this through all of these front loops of that last round and pull tight. To close up the top of our hat, just like that, into a nice little point. And then we can go ahead and weave that in just as we did with the white yarn. And that's it. So then when you finish the tip of your hat, all you have left is to make the pom-pom. And I do have a description exactly on how to make this. I just used a piece of cardboard. I used that method, and I walk you through in the description. But we do actually have videos on making pom-poms on the Creative Crochet Corner website if you need a little bit extra help, you want to check that out. Also, a lot of my other projects that I make, I really love pom-poms. So if you're looking for, a video where I'm attaching it to a hat and all that kind of stuff, you can also find that in a lot of my other hat patterns that I've made for the Creative Crochet Corner website. So yeah, you can go ahead and look those up if you need a little extra help making the pom-pom and attaching it to the top. And the last thing I would say, after you weave in your ends, if you made this in acrylic especially, you're going to want to steam block your hat. It makes a big difference. It makes the drape so much nicer. This is a pretty stiff hat because, as I said at the beginning, I really crocheted up a stiff gauge so that it would be warm and the ribbing would be nice and substantial and it wouldn't get all stretched out. So I just want to show you the difference between the two fabrics. These are the same exact yarns made by me with the same hook. So this one has been blocked and this one has not. You can see that this is just really floppy and, it just has a nice, like when I pick it up, if you imagine it's on someone's head, it's just got a nice little swing to the hat and it's just really nice and drapey. This one, not so much, right? It's very stiff. I mean, it's still cute and maybe you want that look, but for me, I really wanted it to feel soft and flexible and comfortable and look really like effortlessly. You just pull it on your head and you don't have to arrange it just so, you just pull it on and it looks cute, right? So I definitely recommend steam blocking if you need some extra help. Again, I have done tutorials on this before. There's also, I believe it's a free video on the Creative Crochet Corner website on how to steam block your acrylics to get that nice soft drape to it. If you made this out of wool, then I would recommend soaking it in water and doing a wet block method instead of steam blocking. You can still steam block it if you like, but I just feel like the wet blocking method will make it, it'll add extra drape and softness to that wool. They just behave differently. They're different types of fibers. So, all right, I'm just gonna check back in to see if I missed anything. Oh, Pratt's mom's here, and they just made it. Hope you got something good at the grocery store. All right. Oh, and we have a thank you from Julie. Thank you, Julie. I'm glad you were here. Thank you guys, everybody who had comments, everyone who's just here watching. I really appreciate you guys. These events are a lot more fun when you guys are talking to me, and I know that you're there, and it makes me feel good when you guys are, interacting with me. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you guys so much. And I'll see you guys soon in another live. Bye, everybody.